Interactive is the name of the game when it comes to the live streams. If you are here live, it is as interactive as you want it to be. And if you're here right now, thank you so much for being here. Portugal in the house. Good evening, Fernanda Nascimento Orchids and Succulents. Angel Bass or Angel Bass, not entirely sure. Forgive me, Michelle Fucarino. Hi. And here's my wingman, Robert Forrest. It's good to see you. Thank you so much. Got Robbie in the house as well. The chat is slowly catching up on the streaming software. So let's do something a little bit different tonight. I've been a bit distracted today, so my prep isn't as, let's say, efficient as I would have liked it to be. But check this out. This gives me spring vibes. This is Dendrobium tortile, who will be our main screen for the night. And I hope that you enjoy this, and I hope that you have questions. If you have any questions when it comes to dormancy versus resting and the care, because in my hemisphere, we're bang smack in the middle of this phase of the orchids that I have in my collection. Maybe you have some as well. Maybe you have some, but they are yet seedlings and you're not entirely sure whether you should force them into dormancy or actually have them go dormant. All this fun stuff and hopefully interesting stuff is on the menu for tonight. I've got Dendrobium nobile up here as a classic example that everything in the orchid hobby has exceptions. One being setup. So mainly let's say Dendrobiums like this are mainly more presentable when they are mounted. Mine got too big for my environment and I had to make a change in order for it to be able to keep it happy. Normally resting type Dendrobiums love to have a lot of humidity around them, even though the temperatures are cold. Most of them are cloud forest types, so there's always a fog around their roots. And my climate is extremely dry. So whatever I discuss today, you will be seeing mainly things in pots. Understand that being epiphytes, everything can be mounted if you have high enough humidity. And also, if you are struggling with getting any orchid to go dormant, let me tell you something. If your climate is not conducive to, let's say, a temperature drop, in most cases, your orchid will probably not go dormant. However, it can still bloom depending on the species or the hybrid. It doesn't need the cold in order to induce blooms. It needs brighter light than even during the summer. All right, usually it's the light that will trigger blooms, maybe not as floriferous as it would be if you had that cold period that it can sleep in, but at least it will bloom. Case in point is a Dendrobium aphyllum, for example. I have seen them even in my climate bloom on keikis that still had leaves on them. So if you're seeing like dead sticks, sorry, but not really, but what looks like dead sticks and everybody's Dendrobiums or some orchids have lost leaves and they are clearly dormant, then please do not be discouraged that yours is not dropping leaves, because your climate may be so ideal, it's just going to hold on to the leaves and it'll grow and bloom just fine. Especially many hybrids these days will do that, and then it's not like you have to be chopping off any leaves in the case of Catasetinae, and we'll get to that as well. Just go with the flow of your orchid. Evie Barcode, it's good to see you. Welcome. Really pleased to have you here. Hope you've had a wonderful week. I hope everybody's had a wonderful week. It is definitely winter in southern Spain. I am freezing my cojones off. Don't have any more. There's nothing more left of cojones here. And it's going to even get worse next week. Yikes. But anyway, so what I have, just as a personal reminder for myself, because distractions were in abundance today, is an image of a video I did about Dendrobium, or well, dormancy, not Dendrobium, but dormancy. versus resting. I'm not going to review the video, but because this image is actually pretty perfect, we can use it as a guideline, because some of the orchids on this table here are actually resting or dormant, pretty much in the same phase and status depending on my climate. And yes, I included a summer bloomer novelty hybrid in this presentation of this video because climate. If the temperatures go down to a place where an orchid is not comfortable, the orchid will slow down or grind to a halt, even though it is a continuous bloomer in perfect conditions. And that is to conserve energy. And across the board, conservation of energy is what induces dormancy, or is why orchids go into rest. So don't worry about seeing that Phalaenopsis there. That is climate-based. And if you've got your Phalaenopsis hybrids in a beautiful, snug, warm environment with 12 hours of light minimum, then she's going to continuously keep growing new leaves, etc. There is no resting. In my case, they shut down because I don't have enough light. My temperatures are not to their liking. All right. Now, if I could take an eraser, I would erase that one out of the way, and we can move on to the next ones. Right in front, we also have some Rapiculus Lalias, but across the board we have orchids in our collection that for months actually do not seem to be doing anything, not visually, let's just say. We can also assess they're not doing anything growing on the root front, but they're still working on their hormones. It's very slowed down. So my Rapiculus Lalias are the example of a miniature-sized orchid that, because of its culture, they do need a cold drop in temperature because they like to get cold. That is their rest period. But you can see that the leaves are upright. There is no watering. They survive, excuse me, they survive on the dew they get in the morning and the evenings, and that is plenty. But they also, in some cases, have a higher humidity. So in our culture, in private collections, we need to somehow supplement a teeny tiny bit of water in these cases, even though they do recommend a very harsh, dry, cold winter. There is nothing wrong if you cannot get the temperatures to go as low as they can handle. The key word being they can handle low temperatures, but it's all relative. What we want is a temperature drop. So again, in perspective of 30 degrees during the summer, and then come, let's say, the cooler months of the year or the rainy season, depending if you're at the equator at sea level, then at least you need to get a temperature drop of 10, 12 degrees in order to be able to relate to a temperature drop. It doesn't mean that you have to go all the way down to 5 degrees Celsius. Sorry, that's 41 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's about the temperature drop. Now, if you have the climate that goes that low, then you can grow your orchids outside in this case because they can handle it. It's not like they need it. They would probably grow a little bit more vigorous. Maybe they may not bloom, but they will be growing growth after growth after growth. But not all orchids, just as a reminder, need the chill in order to bloom. What they need much, much more is the right amount of light. Evie Barcode says, my orchids are now at 14 degrees and my indoors at 20, and they will have slowed down. I think so too. Because again, if your summer temperatures are much, much higher than what you're quoting here for your winter, then that is a temperature drop that will slow a metabolism down. If you can maintain your summer temperatures throughout the entire year, then that wouldn't be happening. So those are like Rapiculus Lalias. If you think that they need a cool down in order to bloom, that is not the case. They need plenty of light to bloom. However, because they are now getting a cool down, they are resting. They are not dormant. The difference being they've got all their foliage. All right, so if you see something that is dormant, as we go back to behind, We go and look at the Catasetina, clearly that is dormant. There are no leaves on it anymore. The same with the Christa Erdmann to the left of the Catasetina. It is resting. Okay, so you see we've got leaves, no leaves. And dormant is also a moment where an orchid resets, the hormones reset. And if you have Catasetina in a perfect climate where the leaves stay on, but the orchid is growing healthily, then do not force dormancy ever. Always follow the path and the guidelines of your orchid, not what you think it should be doing during a calendar year. And that will move me on to the subject of the seedlings of any of these orchids or others in the orchid hobby that come in as seedlings, and their culture says that they go into a rest phase or a dormancy. Do not treat a seedling like a mature plant until the seedling has somewhat matured into a juvenile size, and then we can impose harsher conditions and let's say harsher treatment of the same. But that would be far too soon to do that within the first or second year of having a seedling in your collection. I have Maxima seedlings in my collection. They are not exposed to the temperatures I have outside, whereas my mature Cattleya Maxima, she can handle the outdoors. A seedling will not handle it. So whatever you see in culture sheets and care guides for a specific species, if you happen to get that in as a seedling, ignore it and just grow it on until it is big and strong and able to cope with harsher conditions. And the same thing goes, let's say, for the Christa Erdmann, and I'm going to throw in the Laelia perenniae, which is on the far left of the table there. Christa Erdmann and the Laelia perenniae, they do something within 4 months of the year, and then they don't do anything. And I use inverted commas when I say anything that we can see. With all the orchids, whether they're resting or they're dormant, the hormones are not raging, but they are mobilizing much, much slower, but they are ready to go when temperatures are consistently rising and daylight, day length is getting longer and longer in a very obvious way. Usually for us people who have to deal with daylight saving time, when we spring forward with the clock, boom, something starts to happen, even though the temperatures are still too low. I see you, Michelle. Even though the temperatures are still too low at night, let's just say, but that 1 extra hour for us in the northern or southern hemisphere, for everybody that does the daylight savings time, it seems to trigger something. So you see how important light is compared to a temperature drop. Increase the light during the winter and as they come out of dormancy or resting, and things are going to just start to explode. Once the temperatures warm up, everything else then kicks into place. Michelle Fucarino says, does a seedling or juvenile tortilla produce keikis? A seedling won't, a juvenile may. Or should I assume I messed up the pattern? No, you did not mess up a pattern. If you're getting keikis from a juvenile, then the orchid is under stress and it's just starting to acclimate and understand where it's at. How long have you had the orchid? Is it a seedling, or have you grown a new growth on it? Is that new growth producing a keiki? Then it's all part of the acclimating process of an orchid that has recently come into your collection. Or, for example, if you have just separated an orchid, you've done a division, that's another form of stress. Even though the orchid, what you've got left, is big enough to handle it, there is still stress incurred, and that will produce keikis as well. So there's a difference, and I hope I made that clear. If you want to answer the question how long you've had the orchid, and if she's otherwise looking healthy, keikis are normally a byproduct of stress. Not something that you've done. It could just be the mere factor of the orchid. Let's just say the orchid has a human mind. The orchid is not entirely sure if it's surviving the stress of a transition or acclimating, temperature, and that's why it's throwing out a keiki. As long as the rest is looking okay, there's nothing to worry about. It's all normal behavior. I have an approximate 12 to 13 second lag tonight, which is nuts because I'm connected by cable. That should actually be much faster. Oh well, let's see if my little internet gremlins can just speed up their pedaling process on their bicycles here. Anyway, so there's that. So let me just, for example, go into, Michelle says, I stressed it out by mounting it, removed keikis prematurely and mounted them separately, almost a year in my care. They're having a strop. That's all I can say. Dendrobiums are relatively tough and yeah, they're having a strop. If you have the growing, hey, Desiree, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. If you are having no issues with the, let's say the how do you say, the texture of the canes, let me go back to, wait a second now. Okay, you are not saying tortilla keikis. So now I'd like to know, what keikis are we talking about? Oh, you are saying tortilla keikis. Doi. Anyway, let me remove this. I knew I saw tortilla, but you know, I've got tortilla on my mind tonight. So let me make that bigger. Okay. So if you see the structures of the canes here, Michelle, they are firm, even though some have snapped. That happened during a storm. I broke the tips of the canes. But if you see, all the canes are lush and stuff, even though they're blooming, and they are firm. If they're leafless and they are firm, everything's going to be okay. How long can you store fungicide liquid already mixed? Treating vandas with a lot of leaf drop. Oh, how long can you store fungicide? If it is organic, I wouldn't go beyond 24 hours. If it is a synthetic, I would take 2 weeks maximum. I hope it's labeled. I don't say that because of maybe your, how you store things, but make sure that it's labeled. I say that because of, how I operate in my household. And suddenly I had fungicide in my arsenal, and yeah, I made a mistake. And that was not a good outcome. So 2 weeks maximum, my opinion. Treating vandas with a lot of leaf drop, that has me concerned. I wonder if the vandas are going through something radical. Have you cut into the rhizome, Angel? Firm canes, something with green leaves and still growing and some without. That's fine. Tortillas have a biannual cycle. So while we're on the subject, I'm going to be switching and swapping, okay? I'm prioritizing questions tonight. Tortillas have a biannual cycle. The canes that grew, let's say, last year, the newest growths will not bloom the following year. So what you see on my tortilla are canes that bloomed 2 years ago, for them to have bloomed, that grew 2 years ago, for them to have bloomed in 2022. Meanwhile, older canes than that will bloom on nodes that are available if they want to. But normally the main blooming happens on canes that are 2 years old, not the ones that grew in the previous growing season. So there's a lot of patience with tortilla moving forward if it's a young plant, especially with keikis. It can take 5, possibly 6 years before seeing blooms, even longer in some cases. So it's not the length of the cane that determines whether it is old enough. It's how many canes there are, how many storage organs a tortilla has in the back, and then how many growths does it have that are mature enough in order for it to bloom while it produces new growth for the next season. But once you have that rhythm going, then you get a constant blooming year after year after year. It's just an orchid that takes quite some time before it actually blooms out. So I hope I answered those questions. And let me go back to my other screen, because I was mentioning about the Perennii and the Christa Erdmann. While they have leaves, it's like they are beautiful. You're very welcome, Michelle. They're beautiful on the shelf, and that's it. Did you talk to your friend you were looking for yesterday? I did not, Angel. I did not. Thank you for the tortilla. I appreciate that. She is beautiful and she can live outside. Happy days. And you see, she's one of those dendrobiums that doesn't lose her leaves from previous year's new growths. Even though she can take a massive temperature drop and she still won't lose the leaves. She will lose the leaves from 2 years ago, not last year's. So she's a beautiful orchid, even during the winter, holding on to her leaves. Robbie Robinson says, does a species Dendrobium nobile variety alba work on the same premise as a tortilla? No. Yes. Sorry. Yes, it's a species. Yes, it does. So you're waiting for your, like next year, the growths of last year will bloom, if that makes sense. This year, the growths of 2 years ago should bloom. Same thing. Gosh, I hope I'm keeping my thoughts. I'm verbalizing them correctly. Okay. Yeah. Every time I see nobile, I'm so unfamiliar with species nobiles. I always think straight away the complex hybrids. So that's my bad. I got to read the questions properly. So yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of hormones at work in orchids, and height doesn't play a part. No, it doesn't. Unfortunately, sometimes we can't replicate an orchid's potential in our culture because we don't have exactly the same specific, climate and whatever. Maybe we don't get the fertilizer mix right. Maybe we don't get the light right. There's a lot of variables until we either dial it in or it just doesn't happen. But that doesn't make any difference. It is age. The age of the cane is, yes, thank you for that verbiage. That is perfect. The age of the cane determines whether it's going to bloom or not. What about Dendrobium tropical sunrise? It still has leaves on the new growth. Okay, I am going to have to Google that because I need to see the orchid to be able to determine an answer. And if I cannot, then I'm going to check for the parents. Oh boy, is she gorgeous. Oh my. All right. Okay, let me share the screen here. Let's do this. Let us do this, and we'll go through this together. All right. I wonder if I can, there we go, put myself in the corner. Let's put Babe in the corner. All right, so first of all, we're looking at the blooms. Oh, wow. Amazing. Right, okay, so what we have here, it is a hard cane, as we say, even though the canes are soft, brittle, they can break easily. But you can see on the structure of the orchid, the canes are hard cane. So Angel says, you still have leaves on new growths. All right, now here we have to look what we've got. We've got Loessii as a parent, that's a species, Golden Gate Sunrise. We go back down, have had her for a while and no blooms. All right, now we're going to continue. That's another hybrid. That is a species. Further down, let's see more species, hybrid, Glomeratum. Okay, what we're going to do is check out the Loessii. Okay, now let's look at the distribution. We've got New Guinea, Papuasia, Asia tropical. Okay, Solomon Islands. So she is not at altitude. She doesn't need cold temperatures. That is my understanding. So while I'm sharing that window, I'm going to do another search, okay? Does Dendrobium, I know this is tedious, but this is how I do it. And if this helps anybody for future answers, Loessii need, no, at what altitude? At what altitude does Dendrobium Loessii grow? Okay, the answer here is Loaceae is found by plant collector, blah de blah, 800 to 1,200 meters on the underside of branches. Now, this is interesting because you've had her for a while and no blooms, and she grows on the underside of trees, which means shade. So it is mature, it is not blooming, and the leaves, there are still leaves on the new growth. I'm going to take a screenshot of your comment because I do not want to forget that. I have to look into it a little bit more in detail now, because I would now need to know more answers from you, Angel, because I need to know what your conditions are, how much light do you give it, what are your temperatures, how much humidity, because this Loaceae species would appear to be the one that is giving the stronger characteristics of into the parentage of your tropical. Hello, where's the name? Tropical sunrise? Yeah. So I would need to know a lot more about your growing conditions, your light, and for example, the humidity that you have. Those two things. Fertilizer, not so much because you've had her for a while. Maybe fertilizer would play a part. Very interesting. I will look into that for you, Angel. And if you want, I don't know, Angel or Angel. I'm sorry, I keep switching. So if you want to email me about your conditions, then you are welcome to do so, because then we can look into it further and see if we can't put a puzzle together there. Down the rabbit hole, yes. And sometimes the answers come really, really quickly, and I was hoping that would be the case here just now, but you got me stumped here, Angel, and we're going to figure it out. Oh, one more question I'm going to ask. At what altitude does Loaceae grow? Nope. Now I want to know, when does Loaceae bloom? Let's have a look. Throughout the year. At any time of year it can bloom. Now that one, you got yourself something special there. Your tropical sunrise probably doesn't know whether it's coming or going. Maybe, oh, hang on a second. Oh, I'm sorry, I just clapped. If anybody's wearing earbuds, hang on a second. Hold your horses. Maybe you need to stop fertilizing. Stress it. If an orchid doesn't bloom, it's had enough light, it is mature, and everything is fine around it, temperature-wise, and in that case would be 20 degrees Celsius on up, stress it. Do not fertilize it and see what happens. Nothing. I don't know if you've ever done that before, Angel, but that's what I would recommend. You see, when orchids are stressed, they do funny things, especially with slipper orchids. If you don't have a blooming slipper orchid and it is old, mature, and it should have bloomed over and over and over again, and it's not blooming, then stress it, and it should bloom. If anybody else has an opinion that they can weigh in on to help Angel out, then that would be much appreciated, I'm sure. Intermediate care, 70%. Not sure what facing window. It's in plus bulb, artificial light inside now after cold weather last month. Sounds perfect to me. Sounds like this orchid is living a cozy life. And why should it bloom for you? It doesn't need to survive. You're doing everything for it. I've had orchids produce a spike simply by moving its location without, yep, that can happen as well. So what we consider stress is repotting, dividing, no roots, recovery, ICU, and that will form spikes. All these conditions need to be taken into consideration to be able to determine whether we should be happy about seeing a spike or whether we should be very, very wary about seeing a spike, because it's giving us other signals if the orchid isn't healthy. But if we don't get any blooms at all, the orchid has no need to survive. It doesn't have to fight. We want blooms because they're pretty, but the orchid blooms because it wants to reproduce and maintain its kind. So without knowing much, much more, stress it out. Do not fertilize it and see what happens. I'm very, very interested because that dendrobium, according to the species parent, should actually bloom at any given point in time. It does take time to do research about parents, Fernanda. Yes, it does. Absolutely. The next thing I would do, it would also try and find the parents of the tropical sunrise and then see, not the tropical sunrise, but the other hybrid within the parentage. Either pronunciation is correct. It's mounted. All right. Well, thank you, Angel. Thank you very much. I don't know how it happens. As long as I don't start speaking in German to you, I think we're going to be okay. There's a lot of files to compartmentalize in my brain. All right. So, okay, stress, of course. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the stress for orchids going into dormancy when conditions are adverse. It's a good thing for some. It's not such a good thing for others. If you haven't seen my Tolumnia video, stress comes in many different forms. Tolumnias don't like this kind of stress, but they will start protecting themselves as well by closing their leaves to reduce any kind of evaporation, any kind of excessive energy consumption that they know that they will need for future survival, if that is even the case. And then we have what I mentioned about Laelia perenniae and the Christa Erdmann. We've got 4 months of boom activity, and it's like, yes, it's alive. And then we have 8 months of now what? Meanwhile, in the case of my perenniae, now it's producing roots like all get out, although this orchid itself is not a very, let's say, generous root producer. It is also super slow in developing its roots, but this is the time of year now, while it is supposedly resting, it is actually producing roots from the growth that grew the previous year and that bloomed. And then once the roots kind of stop growing, I won't see anything happening with this orchid until, well, end of May. And then everything happens very quickly. It blooms out and we're back to square one. After the blooming of many, many orchids, that is when many, many orchids drop into a rest phase, whether they lose their leaves or not. So, with the exception, of course, of our deciduous orchids, but the rest phase, for example, and I'm going to pull something up just because gorgeous, and while we're going to talk about it, why not? No, we've got the option. Let me see which picture I want. Which one do I want? So spoiled for choice here. But I want to make sure that we're not putting any noise there. You don't want to be hearing that. Let me go to, I'm working on a new software so that I don't have to do all this nonsense flipping things around. Well, it's going to take time. It's probably going to take at least 6 months before I've got that all dialed in. Here we have gorgeousness in personified, and we also consider Catasetinae the types that go dormant. She has lost her leaves in my climate, and she is, hey, Danya, Hakuna Matata for being late. There's no such thing as late in a live stream. It's like a city bus. You hop on, you hop off, you get back on if the bus is still doing its route. So awesome to see you. But yeah, clearly this is a kind of orchid, a kind of genus that is supposedly going dormant because it drops its leaves in some climates. I have heard that in Hawaii, where temperatures are perfect all year round, Catasetinae necessarily do not go dormant. They just hold on to their leaves, they bloom, they grow another new growth, happy days. So none of this applies to Catasetinae in this category and some hybrids if the climate is perfect. So if yours doesn't drop its leaves, don't cut the leaves off. I am not a fan of that. If you cut the leaves off, I don't judge you for doing it. You will have your reasons. I've always been the kind, what is the orchid doing? And I'm following the orchid's lead. I am the caretaker. I am not the boss. They are the boss of me. So in Catasetinae case, we have a classic example of what I mentioned earlier. Normally, Every orchid goes into resting phase, not dormant, but goes to a rest phase once it's finished blooming. Hello! When we look at the structures of a Catasetinae, usually we see blooms and there's no leaves. So the question is the orchid dormant, resting, active growth? What is going on? Because normally when we look at Catasetinae and we do talk about the 3 seasonal growths of orchids, when they start dropping their leaves, we say they're heading into dormancy. But when we say an orchid is in bloom, that means, or producing spikes, that means active growth. And many times we have this little bit of a conundrum. So let me share another picture just so you could see. I don't know how high I go with this image or this video. I don't know, but at least I can explain my point, or let's say show my point instead of talking in circles. So we just saw the orchid herself in bloom. And this is as she was developing her spikes. And you can see at the top, you can see that there's still 2 more leaves on the growth that is forming spikes. Now, Louise Gunn, it's good to see you. Welcome. Woohoo! Australia in the house. Good morning, good morning. I hope your Saturday is starting off beautifully. Enjoy some warm sunshine, please, please. You are in the heaven while I am freezing. But anyway, so you see here we have this classic example. Is it an active growth or not? Whereas any other orchid we would still be watering, fertilizing, etc. Catasetinae heading into dormancy. Everybody talks about reducing watering. This is where I'm going to go back to full circle when I said it depends on your setup. In my setup with leca and self-watering, I am pretty much the slave of keeping my roots damp, even though my reservoir is not full as it used to be. But I want my roots to stay alive throughout the entire winter. And of course, it takes longer to dry out, so I'm not watering as heavily. Yes, I have reduced, nom nom, that happy sap tastes so good. Anyway, so I've reduced watering, but I am still watering, and to a degree, because I want my spikes to pull through. At this stage, I'm still giving some calcium and magnesium, even though my bulbs are pretty nice and plump in the back. However, I want them to stay that way. So it is a personal choice and a setup situation in conditions where you want to grow in a wet-dry cycle. Your setup is a wet-dry cycle. Even a PET method that normally has a reservoir at the base, once the orchid goes dormant, the entire media is then supposed to dry out. So that is a choice everybody needs to make for themselves. My setup forces me to continue keeping my roots alive. Now, everybody says, well, we can also just chop off the Catasetinae as it heads into dormancy and store them as a bulb. Well, if I were to do that at this point in time, or at any point in time as my orchid heads into dormancy, we wouldn't be seeing this. So be very, very careful with the radical, easy peasy, get it out of the way kind of method of growing this kind of genus by saying, because that is what some care guides say, you can chop off the roots and just store the bulbs wherever it's dark until you see a new growth and then you pot it up again. It doesn't work that way across the board. You can do that, but you'll forfeit maybe a spike that you didn't know was coming, and your conditions could be such that it doesn't need to have its roots chopped off. Catasetinae roots do not die if you maintain them alive throughout their rest dormant period. And when I did a repot, all the roots in the pot were pretty much alive. So that is not just my setup, it's the way it is. Roots will die if the media goes dry, no matter that it's leca. It'll also go, they will die if it's in a PET method or if you just let your sphagnum moss go dry. So it's personal, it's a very personal choice what you want to do with your Catasetinae. Personally, I prefer not to see any kind of stress on my pseudobulbs on my Catasetinae. I have made some serious mistakes with the Catasetinae that I lost. because of me fussing around saying it doesn't need that much water. And I wasn't, I was keeping my microfibers damp, but I also made a mistake with slow release fertilizer. And the whole thing started to compound itself. My back bulbs were shriveling. I didn't dare water. Then I watered. Then I lost the growth. It was a whole thing. So I am always of the opinion now, I don't want my pseudobulbs to shrivel, and that is why I keep my roots alive for as long as possible, so that when the new growth then starts, the back bulbs are strong enough and I don't have to wait for new roots before figuring out when can I water again. Anne M, it is good to see you. Welcome. Good to have you here. I am babbling away. Interrupt me at any given time. If you have questions tonight, it's more about questions, but I'm filling in the air. I'm giving you white noise until I see a question, then I stop what I'm saying and will address them directly. And I have an 11 to 13 second lag. So if you're typing away and I'm still yapping away, I will see you eventually, okay? The little Spanish cyber gremlins, they're pedaling a little bit slow again tonight. What is a PET method? A PET method is if you have yourself organic media at the base, it's like a semi-hydroponic setup with the two holes that then establish a reservoir in a pot or a container that has no drainage at the bottom, and you create a reservoir like a semi-hydro pot. Then you put inorganic media at the base. Usually people swear by lava rock because that also stabilizes the pot because of the weight. You can also use leca, but you can see the size of the bulbs. These orchids get pretty big when they then also leaf out. So you want to make sure it is a heavy media that is inorganic at the base, and then you fill it up with bark. And then with the top layer, it's like making a latte macchiato, but with organic media. You layer it, bark in the middle, sphagnum moss in the top, so that any new roots can go straight down into the moss and find their way through the container, through the bark, eventually reaching the reservoir. And this is it's a great setup if you like to, or coconut coir, exactly. It's a great setup if you are growing in het, Baloo, face, purple, crying. Baloo? What is a pet? I was thinking to Baloo. Okay, face, purple, crying. I'm lost. Did I just explain something you knew already where you're making a joke? Because now I'm completely lost. I don't know what. Baloo is my daughter's dog. Face and purple crying. Help! Help! Brain fart. I have no idea what this means. Anyway, so yes, PET method is the organic way of growing Catasetinea by using a reservoir and using inorganic media at the base. So there's that. Yeah, anyway. So anywho, so you see, depending on the setup, it depends what you do with your orchid. I continuously have mine wet throughout the winter season, even though I am a little bit less on the watering front because things just don't dry out. And you can see now we've got a conundrum. She is coming into pet. I was thinking, okay. I see. And that's why, I see the emoji didn't come through. The emoji didn't come through. It showed up as text for me. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Awkward. Terrible when you have to explain a joke, Danya. I'm so sorry. Julie-san, hey, good morning, Australia number 2. It's fantastic to have you here. So yeah, so you see the exceptions, right? Now, this orchid, obviously heading into dormancy, if you're letting your media dry out during the dormant period, if it's in organic media, then of course the orchid would bloom and spike and do all of that anyway, if that is its growth cycle, because of the storage organs in the bulb. This is not happening because I'm keeping my roots wet, This happens because that's the way the orchid grows, and it uses its reserves in order to produce spikes. So while it is heading into dormancy, and we speak about spike production, bud production, that is still active growth, here we have an exception in the orchid hobby. It is heading into dormancy and is drawing energy from its bulbs in order to bloom. So you don't have to do what I do in order for it to spike and bloom. Wet roots doesn't mean a spike. I am doing this because of my setup, and I hope that I didn't mess that explanation up too much and I've still got your attention and what I said makes sense. In just one moment, I got to refresh the frog. Alrighty, meanwhile, what is the care for something like this moving forward? It all depends on your setup. If you're letting your roots go, if you're letting your media go completely dry, then you just don't do anything. That is the beauty of Catasetinea. I love them because it gives us so many options to play around with. Normally, by this time, you wouldn't even be watering anymore, and you can just enjoy the blooms. And eventually, when the blooms fade, you don't need to give them any light anymore either. They don't need to occupy prime real estate in your shelf. Everybody else can take over. And then when you see the new growth, that is a completely different subject. That is not for dormant or resting, because by that time, the orchid is going back into active growth. So while I just collect myself here, we're going to have a look at it right now, because it is beautiful and smells like cinnamon, spicy ginger, sugar cookies. So full in bloom. Also, we could say full in dormancy, and yet the energy of the bulbs can sustain this show without any problems, even, hang on a second, Robbie, even if you let your media go dry and your roots die. The back bulbs, they can handle all of this. Isn't that amazing? Sorry about the blotches on my camera, I just noticed. Oh, there's a conversation going on. Absolutely. I thought I shared it, Robbie. I shared Julie's email with you. Julie asked me to send you her email, and I sent you an email with her email. But I'll send it again. Hakuna Matata. All right. So we've gotten to that point. Now, we are also going to go to another point. Let me make sure I get my images pulled up, because there's a lot happening when it comes to our deciduous dendrobiums that I just want to briefly touch upon, just to make sure that we, oh, sorry, gorgeousness, I have to cut you out here, that I do want to show you, because we do have deciduous dendrobiums that are right now looking like some kind of Medusa without, hair, not even moving, okay? Up until now, any kind of dendrobiums that actually loses their leaves, that includes a tortile, that includes a nobile, that includes anything, whether you're losing your leaves or not. So I don't want to just section one part out. If your leaves have dropped, it is super, super obvious. Okay, this orchid is dormant. If your leaves are still intact, but it is one of those resting dendrobiums like the tortile, same thing, okay? The setup determines what you do. Now, here I have an aphyllum that is, as you see here, I'm circling nubbins. I hope you can see them, because I can't expand the picture anymore. Maybe I can. Hang on a second. Oh, I've learned something new tonight. Anyway, so this happens normally after our day hours changes and we have an hour extra of light. For months, this orchid looks like a sticks, like the hair of Medusa without any movement unless the wind blows. In that time period, when the orchid just looks like a stick or several sticks, we still need to provide some moisture. Now, if you're growing in a greenhouse and the humidity is 70% or higher consistently, you don't have to apply any moisture whatsoever. If you're in an extremely dry climate like mine and your orchid is mounted, oh my goodness, please do not forget to water it, even though you feel that is the last thing you want to do. Consider it a perennial that you have outside, because sometimes we have cold, dry winters, even there is ice, but we cannot really water, and we think, well, it's cold, our perennial plants don't need anything. Not true. You need to provide water, even if not a lot, you have to in a dry climate. This orchid happens to be mounted. There is no more sphagnum moss on the mount, and it's up to me to be the dew. Okay, so don't let them go without in a dry climate. If you have this orchid potted, of course you can be a lot more conservative when it comes to watering, but don't leave them without. If you have your orchid potted in a huge, like a very high humidity environment like a greenhouse, also don't let them be without water for too long, because it's a completely different ball game having high humidity around the roots in a greenhouse as opposed to high humidity in a, an orchid in a pot that is not being watered, because the media will dry out, which is great, and it's okay for a certain period of time, but not for a long period of time. There is no guarantee that the ambient humidity will find its way into the pot. Maybe just on the surface, but not deep enough. So consider these orchids hanging in trees in cloud forests where there's constant fog. When I say constant, I mean 24 hours of the day is fog. That's a lot of moisture around the roots, even though they may not need it. Okay, granted, the airflow is exponential in those forests as well, so the roots don't rot out. But we need to simulate a little moisture in dry climates, or orchids in pots with organic media, they need it as well. Now, I say organic media because, and I'm taking exception to inorganic, but I'm saying organic media because we know that organic media can hold on to water for quite some time, and some roots during cold temperatures can die back. It is a fine balance. I am not saying watering as in a flush. I'm talking a trickle. If you have one of those dentist things that they squirt in your mouth so you can flush your mouth, one of the little hooks on it, that's what I'm talking about. Just a little trickle around the surface. You're not flushing the pot. If you're in inorganic media, like in my case, again, my roots as well, not in this case, but with a tortilla, I do keep my microfibers once again damp, because my roots in there would desiccate and die if they were exposed to a dry environment. They are not used to that. So I'm keeping them damp, even though I have low temperatures, but they're not soaking wet. I hope that makes sense. If anybody has any questions, stop me in the comments and we'll talk about it. Now, that is all they need. A trickle of water every once in a while, because they are dormant. This is not resting. This orchid is dormant. The ones that are resting are in the background of this image because they've got leaves on them. So while they're not actively growing fast, even though they are not dormant, I do have growing points on the canes in the background. It's a completely different orchid, but it is resting. Same kind of care. Makes no difference whether you've got resting or dormant. Just the appearance gives you a much better, much clearer indicator of what the orchid is doing, and it is super, super helpful. The moment, and this is why I put this image up, I know, I'll get to my point eventually. The moment you see, la, nubbins, you need to at least start with calcium and magnesium, and then also start straight away with seaweed. This is your green light. Now it's go time. And people say, well, if you start to fertilize too soon, then you'll get keikis. Well, hooray! We're going to get some keikis. We get more orchids. Now, I know that's not always the case for people. They want to have blooms. In my case is, give me what you got right now. You're showing me that you are starting to produce your blooms. In this case, the orchid blooms before she starts new growth. But This is a go sign. Again, you don't have to, at this point in time, start fertilizing or supplementing. I highly recommend that you do, because I'm of the opinion, once again, in these circumstances, that these canes should not shrivel. It is going to take an exponential amount of energy now for this orchid to bloom with absolutely no leaves to photosynthesize with. So keep that in mind. If you have a leafless cane, there is no light is going to help any, no leaves with light helping to produce energy. This orchid is waking up, not at the moment, but this was back in 2022, with absolutely nothing to draw from for months. And I have to tell you, if I'm hungry in the morning and somebody is starting to demand something from me, even if, let's just say CalMag is the coffee of the orchid, it's the wake-up call. Don't do that to me, because, I'm going to be fighting really hard to stay polite. Let's put it that way. All right. So a little bit of sustenance. It's waking up. You notice it's waking up, and then start with calcium and magnesium. No need to fertilize, because we don't really have that much of an active root system going, but calcium, magnesium will help in the formation and the production of the spikes, so that it doesn't withdraw the calcium being immobile, but the mobile nutrient of magnesium. You want the magnesium to stay consistent throughout all the canes, so that when it comes time for new growths to form, there's already magnesium enough for the orchid to draw from. So for me, if I can make that as let's say an analogy, calcium, magnesium is the first thing you want to do with any resting orchid that comes out of a rest phase. It is the coffee, it is the manna that gets it going, that it knows it can push, and you can push it hard. Okay, so by this time, this is like, let's say a week later, then we can see more of the nubbins coming forth. By the time, and this is still calcium, magnesium, and seaweed. At this point in time, we're also pumping in seaweed, because now we can see active growth, as opposed to the Catasetina that we saw, because once the Catasetina stops blooming, it is in actual fact really, really dormant. I mean, snooze mode dormant? No, it is conked out, knockout. But at this phase, in this kind of an orchid, it is grow time. Buds, blooms, whatever, it is on the move, even though we don't actually see any new growths at the base. So calcium, magnesium, pump in the hormones, give it the seaweed, and you'll just watch. When the new growths come, the backup hormone boost is already there. It doesn't have to pull anything from anywhere from the rest of the orchid, if that makes sense. Because this orchid, for example, this species, and probably if it is anything like a parent, let me make sure I don't have any volume here, then this orchid is in bloom while it is starting new growths. So these growths are now blooming out. All right. This is also not a long blooming period. It's such a shame. It's a little show for a short period of time, but it is gorgeous. It is worth it. The rest of growing this orchid is so much fun. So this orchid's blooms are, let's say now, maximum 2 weeks old, but we have new growths starting at the top. And that is what I want to point out. These growths will start as small nubbins. As the blooms start to fade out, these are then the growths that we are pushing on for the next season. And you don't want to skimp on what is happening on the canes on the bloom front, because these guys will want to start off with a bang, and we want to get them as strong and as long as possible. This is the time, once the blooming has faded, even though no new roots have started yet, the old roots are now active, because now it's not the canes that are supporting the blooms. It is the old roots, even though they may be tired, they are alive, they are full and active now, and they are pushing what is happening with the new growths until the new growths can produce its own roots. This is the time to start with fertilizing, okay? So we have the cycle. This orchid is fantastic, not just for dormancy, or it's just great for all the 3 seasons of dormant growth. We go into dormancy, there is no rest period. It starts its blooming and it starts its growth, and it's just go time. It's go time until we see the senescing, until the lights drop again, the day length, and then it goes into full dormancy once again. Now, if you have any questions with what I've said, because many people say don't water, don't fertilize, the orchid can do it all on its own. While that is correct, why? If we can help it along, why not? Because, some of us don't have 9-10 months of the year to grow canes before our temperatures drop and an orchid like this starts to then, go into dormancy. Some of us have a very short window of time in order to get nice long canes, and why not go gung-ho? It doesn't hurt the orchid at all to do so. On the contrary, it's not drawing energy from the older bulbs. Now, one thing that can happen once again is there may be keikis, but some orchids are going to produce keikis no matter what. Whether it is stressed, whether it is happy, whether it's super happy, it's going to produce keikis. And this is one of them. It's a species. It's a fully established orchid. And it's a keiki machine. I love it. I'm sorry. I have no issues with keikis whatsoever. I know that some people, it frustrates them, and I get that. We all want to have blooms. I understand that. But let me tell you something, eventually, at least keikis are there. It's something that we're getting out of the orchid. Eventually, the blooms will come if we start to feel like we're not getting part of the culture quite right. Then eventually the blooms will come. But as long as we get keikis, we can still get more orchids out of that one. So I'm just checking to make sure I didn't prepare any notes today, but I've been through my images and I've been through the one that was my guide here. And yeah, well, the question is are there any questions? That didn't even make sense. The question is, are there any questions? Maybe it made a little bit of sense. But here we are. So if anybody would like to add to this subject, I can drop the link into the chat. You're welcome to come up if you have any questions where you felt I was talking in circles. That happens a lot, especially if I don't have notes like tonight. Then please bring them up as well. You are welcome to join me on the panel. I've got about 30 minutes and let me know. Otherwise, I can tell you I checked my film this morning prematurely again. There is no movement per se, but I'm very, very happy to see the nubbins in images. It's just one of those times of years where you're just looking forward to, a bit of a temperature change. So let me know. We're going to have a little bit of background music and let me know if there's anything at all that you would like to run by me. While we wait. I'm just checking. Another pic here. It's Robbie. Robbie in the house.
Okay, so
Hello. Just 1 second, Robbie. I have a question from Danya. How the orchid can know it is in dormancy if there is some water, temperature, and less light. Low temperatures will tell the orchid and the hormones that it is in dormancy, and less light. As in day length, sorry. Doesn't mean intensity is less, but the hours are less. Sorry, Robbie, go ahead.
So this pertains to the Dendrobium nobile variety alba. Those were given to me in the spring of 2021. They were barely to 4 inches tall at the time. They were just put in my hand because I was doing some volunteer work at the greenhouse.
Right.
So I've grown them on for the last couple of years, and I was tempted to try and do the cool down, and I left them outside till the temperatures dropped down to about, maybe 8 Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't really have a place outside to keep them without freezing.
Right.
So I brought them in and I just gave myself a little slack there and said, oh, they probably wouldn't bloom yet anyway. They're too young. I mean, one of them, just this past season's growth is maybe 10 inches. That's what I mean. That's what I meant by age versus height.
Right.
But I still have a notion of maturity, height and maturity.
Right. And it can be that the height determines the maturity of the orchid, but in some cases, especially when it comes to nobile species, and this is because of the orchid that I got from Fernanda Nascimento, Orchids and Succulents, the Cooksoneanum, it's a nobile species, my one and only. And I have noticed from observing it that the height of the cane can determine its maturity, but it's the back structures that will determine whether it is strong enough to bloom.
Right.
Especially also because what you pointed out, thankfully, in very clear words, the age of the cane determines that it's going to bloom. And I said yes, because I read Nobile thinking it was the hybrid. And then I thought, whoa, no, N was not in capital letters. And then my mind flipped to the Cooksoneanum, and my Cooksoneanum is not blooming on the growths of 2022, but on the growths that Fernanda sent me.
Right. Right. I mean, these were just keikis that were just pulled off and put in my hand. I went, oh, okay. I hadn't planned on getting a Nobile type because I know they need a cool winter rest. And I thought when I was in Alberta that I could kind of wing something over there, but things changed. So I think
you got a cane of 10 inches.
Only two of them, actually, only since this past summer, this past year's growth. So they won't bloom till the following.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that is good going, good growing.
Yeah, they've done really well. I actually have 2 pots of them. One little pot I have, there was only 2 little kikis. They were barely 2 inches tall. They're still short, but one of them's pushing 5 inches. So, I just figured I would give them away at some point.
Oh, goodness me. I love me an orchid that does kikis. Absolutely love them. And as far as I'm concerned, yes, it is important to be able to interpret why a keiki is coming. Why is it there? If it's a healthy orchid, it's throwing a keiki, that's because it's super duper happy and woohoo, baby time, let's reproduce. We can do this. I have enough energy to reproduce. If an orchid is stressed and looking weak and looking like it's about to go downhill and it's producing a keiki, that is a warning sign. And then it's best to culture the keiki as opposed to worrying about the mother plant because she knows more than we do. The keiki is the future.
Yeah, this was on the keikis that I got was given were from the mother plant, and it's growing in a greenhouse. They get optimum conditions and care over there. It's just yeah. No.
Here's the funny thing. It's not a winter rester. It's a continuous grower. Dendrobium baryota. Okay? I'm going to try and multitask here. Forgive me.
Okay, because I ended up...
Sometimes I'm suck at multitasking, but I'm going to try. Go ahead.
No, I heard that I watched the replay of a live stream you did a while back, and you're talking about the baryota, and then you said blah, 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 blah.
Right, lots of bloody blah.
Jonathan's Glory.
Yes.
So this one, I actually ordered one
Okay.
because I didn't think I could. I'm really stuck. If things need a cool winter rest, I'm saying, Robbie, don't touch it. Don't touch it.
Right.
Don't touch it because it will drive me bonkers. So I thought, okay, well, that sounded, and I watched it a couple times, Nina,
Uh-huh.
to make sure
Uh-huh.
I got it right. And I thought, well, I should be able to grow and bloom this one.
Yes.
So I have it on order. The Jonathan
Awesome.
Glory something or other. Because I love the dendrobiums. I'm always drooling over everybody's dendrobiums.
Yeah.
And and I don't know why. I mean, because the Denfels have some beautiful blooms on them, but I'm not interested,
Yeah.
weirdly enough,
Yeah.
because they would grow great in, and I think bloom great in my conditions.
I think they would as well because they are warm to hot growers.
Yeah. So what's my
And
problem? And that, what the other one is the Oncidium twinkle I can't get on board with. And I see everybody's beautiful, profuse blooms, and I'm going, Robbie, what's your problem? How come you don't,
not
you
every
know?
orchid has to gel, to be honest with you. And actually you're quite lucky that you're not you don't have an affinity for the twinkle, because oh boy, it's heartbreaking when they start to rot on you, and it just happens so fast. I'm trying to save mine. So, nobody needs
Mm.
to feel like, oh, something's wrong with me because I don't like a twinkle. Let me tell you something. I'm not going to replace my twinkle if it doesn't make it, because I've seen the cycle happen, and it's like, oh, you know.
Oh, no,
But
no, I wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't do it either.
so this
I
video,
have a
obviously.
huge Oncidium wilsonara that's on steroids.
Oh, okay. Good.
But
So here,
anyway, back to the topic at hand.
what I
Yeah.
wanted to show on this video with the Berryoda, unfortunately, it's not one of those one that pans things, but hopefully my mouse, where you see the play part down here, you see a keiki right here, okay?
Yeah.
Can everybody see that? Yes, Kingianum is a parent of the Berryoda, definitely.
It is of the Jonathan Glory as well.
Exactly. That's why they are exactly the same. And it wouldn't surprise me if we in Europe called a Jonathan Glory Berryoda and vice versa. A Berryoda is a Jonathan Glory over the pond. I cannot identify a
Oh,
difference because I haven't seen them next to each other. But here's the thing. This
Desiree,
work. Hmm,
go
well,
ahead. I see you, Desiree. I see you, Desiree.
yeah, I just want to finish with
Yeah.
the train of thought about keikis, all right? Now, this orchid looks beautifully established in the pot. It's a big orchid, and you would say, why is it throwing out keikis? Well, this orchid, despite its health and its vigor, it did not throw out keikis for me after 2 years being in my collection. In the third year, I divided it. And this is the blooming of 2022 after the division was made in 2021, and it had undergone stress. So you can see that even a big orchid, and I kept 60%, and then 20% went one way and 20% went somewhere else. So I kept 60% of the orchid, but the mere fact of repot plus dividing didn't matter how big the piece was that you keep. These keikis were a signal of, yeah, no, I didn't like what you did to me. And this year I've got another flush of keikis, two as a matter of fact, but it doesn't matter. You see, she is still blooming and she is happy. So keikis are not always a sign of stress. Even on a mature plant, it can signal that something was not quite to the liking of the orchid, but the orchid is healthy and fine. And that's why I wanted to show my Berryoda. Anyway, Robbie
You
and
know, you
Twinkles.
know, what you were saying about, the stress, and it's still blooming and it's producing keikis, indicating that there was something not quite right. But I really heard you say that, and I thought how marvelous the systems are
Yes.
the intelligence of the plants that we have in our home. Like there,
Yes.
to me, there is an intelligence there.
Absolutely.
And
That's
we
why I
and
call them creatures. They know more than we
creatures,
do.
yeah. And you talk about, you use the word dialogue. I talk about communication with that, with the plant, you know.
That's right.
It's just amazing. It just
Yeah.
amazes me.
And you see, that's the thing when I feel so bad because some people, you know, I fully understand where they're coming from when it says, oh, I've got keikis again. And that's why when I was mentioning my phyllum and I'm already applying calcium, magnesium, when I see the nubbins pop through the canes, and people would say that will produce keikis. Well, that orchid will produce keikis whether you fertilize or not. My interest is, okay, the blooms don't last very long, but I enjoy them for the time frame. My interest is what's coming through the top. I want to be ready. I want the orchid to be ready for that. So once an orchid has bloomed, I know that its hormones are already going in a different direction, and so is my mind. So I'm
Yeah.
preparing, like I mentioned the other night, it's like the fashion industry, except it's not a 6 month ahead of the game. We are talking 3 months, 6 weeks, depending on what the hormones are doing and depending how long it takes for the orchid to respond. That's where I'm going. While I enjoy the blooms at the present, I'm already working with the orchid towards what's coming around the corner in due time.
Right.
I'm not trying to insist that on anybody, but it makes so much sense, and
Yeah.
it helps in the observation of an orchid and not just the dormant or the resting ones, because here's the thing. We also have orchids where the rest period is so minute, we don't even perceive it as a rest period because we consider it a continuous grower. Meanwhile, not the monopodials. I'm not talking that
That's
continuous
me,
grower.
Nina.
I'm,
That's me. And I've
I'm
been trying to tune in closer to what is the plant doing at this time.
right.
That's may not be obvious to me because I'm not noticing the obvious, the ones that aren't obviously in a rest.
Exactly. And you see, when we have these hybrids come that are bred for vigor, continuous blooming, maybe twice a year, when we can only define species and usually primary hybrids going into rest periods because you can see a distinction. You can't see that if you have a beautiful Cattleya that has been bred to throw out new growths while the blooms are still intact. So there
That's
is
why.
exactly, there is a rest period that we don't even have to take into consideration. We just eliminate that and keep doing what the orchid is doing.
Yeah.
So it's not like every orchid has a rest period because of the breeding. If the
Right.
breeding hadn't been there, we would be talking about this for every single orchid. It just doesn't happen that way. And again, excluding monopodials, which for the most part are continuous growers if their climate and the setup is provided for them to do so. All right. So
Right.
I like to also say, what is your orchid doing? It's growing a new growth. I'm like, fertilize. Oh, what? Do I start fertilizing now? No. 2 weeks ago. You know?
Well, you're sure sinking that in my brain about the calcium magnesium, the CalMag.
Yeah, it's the
And
coffee.
and when it's important.
Yeah.
I'm
So
I'm I'm getting it.
thank you, Robbie. Thank you for that feedback. So, twinkles. Yes, everybody's screen is still because I put the video on pause. My apologies. Sorry, Angel. There we go. Your Desiree Grace, as long as the sound isn't crackling, that's the most important thing. But Desiree Grace, hold. What's wrong with the twinkles?
Nothing wrong with twinkles. But she might have been asking you because of the challenge that you've had in your particular conditions are
Yes.
having with it.
Yes, they are for me an enigma. As much as I would like to have my 3 twinkles not reduced to just I don't even know what to call it, 15%. I don't know. But as much as I would like to sell my 3 twinkles, I need to understand the leca ratio to the twinkle roots so that they don't rot out on me. And I got that wrong with the first 2. I thought I had corrected it with the third. That was not the case. Meanwhile, scale attacked it, and the moment a twinkle gets weak, it's like, oh boy. The one way to save a twinkle is to mount it. And Dum Dum here has not actually gone to the place where I could maybe scrounge some baked cork bark. But I'm trying to save my twinkle while it's still in the pot, looking a hot mess, because it can be done. I know it can be done because pretty much it's not with the leca anymore. It's sitting on its own garbage, and that would be a mount, right?
Yeah.
So, but don't be like, you know, that there's certain, I can't at this point in time look at an orchid and say, yeah, no, it doesn't do anything for me. But I know I've had the case, I just can't remember which one it is. So I don't know. But twinkles are gorgeous. They are frustrating if they go wrong.
Yeah. I see most people are either growing indoors or the grow tents or the greenhouses, you know, and they've got these profuse blooms all over the place. And I think, I don't know. I'm a sucker for the cattleyas and the dendrobiums.
Yeah.
And the phragmipediums. And the golden bee
I posted your images. Let me tell you something. I consider myself blessed enough to have a climate that I can grow certain orchids outdoors all year round.
All year long. I know.
I
it's not jealousy. It's just like, oh, I wish I could do that all year long, but I can't.
Whereas I wish I could put my lights on and put the heat on, because then I don't have to always sound as though I'm making excuses as to why this isn't working. This one has died. This one looks like it's got stem rot. You know what I mean? I hate doing that. Yeah. If it was just me without a channel, I'd take it in stride and say it is what it is. But I'd never, ever try to come across as though I'm making excuses. But I know that it can be perceived that way. And that's not what I want. So
Nina, I don't perceive it that way. I have, well, maybe because I've been watching you long enough. I know what your conditions are. I know what you're working with and the challenge you have, and you persist. Nina, you persist.
And it's fun when you succeed.
Yeah.
It's fun to accept. It's fun to accept the consequences because you have accepted the consequences. It's not as stressful for you anymore. But when you then succeed beyond expectations, it's like, you know?
Yeah. You're welcome to share the other photos I sent as well. I forgot to say so specifically.
I've already shared them on the community post.
The phragmipediums?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. Damn. Sorry, what?
I sent you another email yesterday, very quick one. I think it was yesterday.
Yes, you did. And they're already on the community post. I was extremely late with the other ones.
Okay. Okay. I have a hard time keeping up during my work week. Anyway,
I have a hard time keeping up with the images coming in, so.
Okay.
Let me just see if Angel has. Thank you, Desiree Grace. Let me tell you something. I do enjoy the live stream so much because I can talk and talk and talk and immediately get feedback and stop and then expand on a subject that is of interest instead of me in my head doing a video thinking, did I cover enough? Oh, I'll wait for the comments. Oh, dear. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that feedback so much. So these are already on the community page here.
Those aren't mine, though.
Oh, that's not yours, of course, no. But it's in the same folder.
Beautiful.
One moment, low budget production. That is.
We better start paying Nina more.
That was from Anna Reiter, also on the community post. But here we go. Okay. Like I said, images flying in. Okay, we have a question here. Danya says, why twinkles have some brown tips? Low humidity or over fertilizing? If it's not because the leaf is burnt because of too much light, okay? If it looks like sunburned, other parts of the leaves also will have marks on them. But if it's only on the tips, then it is too low humidity or too much fertilizer. I hope that helps. And I'm going to put my little ticker away.
Are the Oncidium twinkles, you know, they're pretty small, sensitive to how much fertilizer they're getting as well? Because they're
Yes.
fairly thin-leaved leaves.
Yes. They are very sensitive. And you're welcome, Danya. It starts because the roots are so tiny. And we can actually generalize that when we say, look at the root size. Depending on the size of the orchid, let's say you have a thin-rooted orchid, but it grows long and leggy and lanky, then of course you can be a little bit more generous with your fertilizer because of all the structures and the size of the structures that come out. But when you look at the twinkle, you've got two things going on. It's a very small structured orchid, like you said, very thin leaves, very delicate cuticle around the leaves. So the cuticle is very sensitive to any kind of environmental influences. And then you've got the tiny little roots. If you over fertilize, the first thing that may happen is your leaf tips are going to go and then your roots are going to go. That doesn't mean that your entire orchid is going to go, but it is a perpetual cycle. You can't flush it out. Now the damage is done to the leaves and the damage is done to the roots. Once the roots go, the next thing that can happen if it isn't stopped immediately is rot will kick in, because now the base is too wet. There is no more drying out of the media. Now with the tiny structures around the base, that's the next, then it's really, really difficult because they're also so tightly compact. Once a twinkle is weakened to the point of not having enough roots, can't take up nutrients, already having very delicate, thin cuticles, it becomes a pest buffet. That is when pests can settle in and attack. Now you've got the tiny structures that are also tightly packed together, and the pests will take a bite and boom, your sensitive cuticles, and starts the rot. And then it is a problem. So it is best, because of the tiny growth of the orchid, even if you've got 15, 20 pseudobulbs, consider the orchid a small structure. It doesn't reach very high into the sky. So the nutrients don't have a long way to go. It doesn't need many nutrients. It is best to under-fertilize a twinkle than to go all the way. Angel, you're going to make me buy twinkles after this. They are gorgeous. Some people hate the fragrance. I absolutely adore the fragrance of all the twinkles that I've had. For me, it smells like very over pungent vanilla to the point of sickly sweet syrup. And if you were to think of, let's say, something that is so sweet that you go, like, Turkish delights or baklava.
I eat that.
Yes, thin pseudobulbs, exactly. Thin structures, everything, not enough reserves. It can just become a whole domino effect of a decline of a twinkle, only by doing one thing wrong at the beginning, and that was being too kind with too much fertilizer. But the Turkish, the baklava with the honey, the saturated honey within the pastry, the filament pastry. I mean, I can eat 20, 25, 50, but afterwards I'm going to be ill. Yeah. The fragrance of a twinkle gives you that feeling. It's far too much, but it is amazing. I love it.
I could learn.
Red raspberry.
No, seriously, I really prefer, I love the vanillas. Anything clovey, cinnamon, spicy. Yeah. Kind of fragrance. I love my Encyclia cordidera for that reason.
Yes.
It's fantastic.
Yes. Now
So, and your black pearl that I'm
oh,
patiently waiting for mine to bloom.
Oh, I'm telling you, I can't get enough of that fragrance, and it fills a room and then some. I can smell it coming down the stairs from upstairs into the living room, even with the terrace door open. It is just
Wow.
insane. It is really insane. Absolutely. I'm interested to hear that Robert Forrest has a twinkle that's called red raspberry, and it smells like a red raspberry. Oh, yum. I'm such a raspberry fanatico. Now,
Yeah.
I had one called
too.
cinnamon, and it doesn't smell like cinnamon. So, yeah.
Okay, Nina, I'm going to bow out.
All right, sweetheart. Thank you.
Thank
you so much for hopping up. I appreciated the company. And in the meantime, I could show you beautiful Phragmipedium here.
Yes, I'd like some praise on that one.
Yeah, everybody in the chat, please use your emojis. Give Robbie a round of applause.
That's right.
Okay. The emojis are there for a reason. Everybody, yay! Well done. That's what we're here for.
Not so well with them, but this one has survived.
In 2 years, we're going to see the one that we saw the other night, and yeah, because you're putting it on reset, so that's a good thing.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm tempted to go buy another one, but anyway,
go ahead.
I'll chat with you later.
All righty. Thank you so much for jumping up.
Okay. I'm not leaving though.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I appreciate that you're here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, anybody else want to try that one out? Because you can see it works. I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time if anybody wants to come up as well and just either just say hi or, just give it a go. Like I said, interactive. I mean, I love chatting to you guys, and I can talk until the cows come home. Well, and then some. But anyway, this is about you. So let me know. Or else I'm going to call it in about 2 minutes, just because. Not because of anything else, but I've kind of exhausted the subject for now. I think I've covered everything. Let me see if that works. And that works. Oh, still fiddling around. There we go. There she is. And this one smells like roses as well. My tortilla. Gorgeousness. And she just looks really funky. She looks like something that it just shouldn't make sense. Thank you, Michelle Fucarino. I think that is now correct. Not quite sure, but there we go. I'm trying to remember the pronunciation of everybody's names. So yeah, this one doesn't look like it should make any sense whatsoever because it's wild and all over the place. No matter how you face the blooms, the buds, in order for them to train to go in one direction, this one does whatever it wants. It goes, you can't train the blooms. You can train the canes, but not the blooms. But well worth it. Thank you, Robbie, so much for being so supportive. And next time, have a wonderful rest of your day, Robbie. Thank you. And next time, if anybody wants to come up, if you want to practice with me, send me an email and say, Nina, I want to do this, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm a little bit nervous. If you want to practice with me, send me an email and I can fire up. We can coordinate a time and I can fire up the back studio and it'll just be you and I or a gaggle of us doing like a private little thing. And then we can practice through it so that you feel comfortable on any live stream just to hop up. Okay? Until then, or hasta, bueno, for me it will be Sunday morning at 12:30 a.m. for our next stream. I am going to say thank you so much for being here. Your support is appreciated. Know that I am now going to put this on private, let it process, and it will go public once the little gremlins in the background do their processing peddling. Have yourselves a fabulous rest of your evening, afternoon, or your day. Count hearts, and that one condition stays. Stay safe. Take care. Bye.